Okay, and we're actually on. We're actually on. Everything has functioned as it is meant to function. Therefore, I am a happy camper. Besides being a happy camper, which is not my actual name, although it would be a good name for a character if Happy was a nickname. Actually kind of Thomas Pynchon-esque. But anyway, hi, I'm Tad. I will be here until approximately 2 a.m. It is now 1 minute after 1 here in California. I know a lot of the folks tuning in at this time of the night here are actually in the morning in Europe, among other places. So I just wanted to say, I realized last week when I made some kind of offhand comment about the weather, I wasn't thinking very carefully about the fact that Europe has been going through a god awful heat wave. I am aware of that. It was not meant to be a snide comment, and in fact, I think I ended that part of the my usual diatribage rather quickly when I realized, like, wait a minute, I think there's actually really wretched weather in Europe at the moment. So anyway, I hope you guys out there are staying calm and cool somehow. I know it's been really bad in England and Italy and Germany and I assume France as well and the Netherlands and all the hell all over the place, especially in Southern Europe. But anyway, so that was just first off the bat. I am aware of it, and I'm thinking about you guys out there. What else is there? We're going to be reading. Yes, going to be reading. The sections of Blue Fire coming up are two actually fairly easy to read because unlike, say, some of the group scenes where there's like 7 different people and every single one has a different dialect they're speaking, and of course I am not a professional actor. I am a thwarted childhood and early adulthood actor. I'm not thwarted. Nobody thwarted me. I just stopped doing it, except for occasional things later on. My kids, with the kids in our local production, we did Wizard of Oz, and that was huge fun. That was only about 10, 12 years ago now. So I have done a few things, but I'm by no means, as with so many things in my life, I never focused on them. The only thing I've really ever focused on, other than, family and friends and stuff, is the writing, because it's really hard to have more than one master, especially if you want to get good at something. I'm not claiming I have yet. I think I'm a decent enough writer, but there's always more room to improve. But that's because I've been working at it for 40-something years now. So there's all the other things that I loved in my life, playing in a band, and writing songs and music and stuff like that. Or I did radio for a number of years, which I haven't done for 20 years or more, 30. This is kind of the closest to it of anything that I've done. And, all theater, as I mentioned, and, and art, of course. I had a long background in art and actually did that professionally for a little while. So, and all of them, I have come to realize, it doesn't really make a difference if you're sort of good at things, if you cannot focus in on them and make them, your lifetime craft or your lifetime art. And it's a great source of disappointment. I would have loved to have been a polymath. I would have loved to have been, Leonardo da Vinci or one of these people, who could do a zillion different things and do them all as well as anybody else could do them. Not everybody can do that. Very few people can do that. So this all by saying roundabout ways, it's as I said, I'm very casual about these readings, and I don't sit down ahead of time and practice dialects. And in fact, I don't even sit down ahead of time usually and see what scenes are coming up, let alone prepare for them in any useful professional way. Not like as if I were an actual voiceover person or something like that. So I'm kind of more like the people that they get in to dub the sex noises for foreign porn movies. Just some guy who happens to be standing around the studio. Hey, come in here and make sex noises. That's kind of that's kind of the equivalent of what I do with these things. It's just like spur of the moment. Let's see how it goes. Again, it's lack of time as much as anything else between just trying to keep up with daily life and trying to keep writing and et cetera, et cetera. It's all I can manage, is what I'm doing. So that reminded me of something else, but now it's completely slid away, but it'll come back before I start reading, I'm sure. If it means to come back, it will come back. Oh, yes, actually, I did remember it, which is that after a lot of planning and thinking and all that, and also a lot of, as I've mentioned, a lot of inflammation problems and stuff like that, I finally started writing the next book as opposed to just thinking about it, and making notes and stuff like that when ideas came to me. So I had to take a day off today because it actually hurt to do 2 days in a row of doing a full writing day. So I'm easing myself back into the process. But it did feel good. As I've told you before, I have this complex where if I haven't actually written any pages, I never feel like I've done any work. This has, and it has nothing to do with, all the normal daily stuff that that you do to keep your life together, that we all do, and that, answering messages, making appointments, going to appointments, taking care of household chores, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But even thinking about the books never feels like work to me. It is work, and it takes a great deal of focus and intention. But it never feels like I've accomplished anything at the end of the day. So to actually get some pages done, great feeling. But as I said, I had to take the day off today to kind of recover. But I hope to be back at it again tomorrow. Still don't have a title for the book. For now, what am I calling it? The Lost House, I think. But that's very much just a holding title, just so I have something to put on my folders on my desktop. Okay, what else? Dogs are good. As good as you can be. Lemon is recovering from surgery, but she's back to normal pretty much. And even the part where they shaved part of her butt and her leg is finally grown back in. So you can't tell anymore. She's not tragic like she was when she had a cone and had one of her hindquarters shaved. Johnny is old and slow, as we keep finding out when we take them both out for walks, because they're now expecting to go out. We got into a habit when Lemon needed to be taken out carefully and lifted downstairs and all that, of taking her out just before dinner time. It's now become a thing that they expect every day. And Johnny always wants to go. And then like after 10, 20 steps, he's slowing down and slowing down and slowing down. And Deb and Lemon are disappearing down the road. And I'm like, come on, John, come on. And then we have to turn around and go back uphill to get back to our house. And he gets slower and slower. And let me tell you, it doesn't help when you're having joint problems to have to walk with a really, really slow dog uphill and half tug him along. But anyway, other than that, he's doing fine. His appetite is good. And, he's getting along with Lemon pretty well. And all that stuff is good. Deb's fine. She is sleeping. But she's doing okay. And anything else to say? Nah, I had a really nice Father's Day, by the way. I'll just mention that because I got a call. I actually saw the kids the night before, but then I got a really nice call, and my son, probably grateful I didn't pick up the phone, left me a really nice message. And my daughter wrote me a beautiful card, and one of our other adopted young people, who is here quite a bit, got me a present, and it just was a really nice Father's Day. So just thought I'd mention that, just in case any of them are listening and they're going like, I hope he mentions that I called him. What else? I can't think of anything right offhand. Just that's the only new news that I have, is that I've started working on the next book, which is actually the book that follows up on The Splintered Sun, but still untitled, or still not permanently titled, follow-up, for lack of a better term. I think I've said this, but if I haven't, I did not intend to sit down and write another like trilogy or something. What I did was I wrote a book that I thought, if people like it, then I'll come back to it someday. I'll come back to this part of Ostenard and this period in Ostenard and this particular setting and these characters someday. And I was actually all set to do something completely different, which was actually a dog book, which I would still like to write someday. Very loosely based on our crazy little Chihuahua, our late lamented other Chihuahua, besides Frankie, but we also had Walter, who we loved too. And Walter actually apparently lived on the street for a year, and that was always, you could see that in his behavior and in the way that he would take advantage of any social situation to put in his claim for dominance or whatever, you know. So he would snatch food out from under the other dogs, and when Johnny, big, you know, almost 80-pound Johnny would misbehave, little 4-pound Walter would jump up and hang on Johnny's cheek or on his ear or his lip, you know, just like hang in midair. So Walter, that always fascinated me, and I wanted to write a book. Obviously, you know, doing things with it and expanding on the concept. Maybe not quite as fantasy-oriented as Tail Chaser Song, but something not dissimilar in the sense of, you know, wanting to write an animal fantasy. And then when I told my publishers about it, it was to a deadly silence. and I as I always hasten to say, I have a wonderful relationship with my American publishers and have for 40 plus years now, since they first published me in '85. And, you know, Betsy Walheim, my publisher and editor, you know, is one of my favorite human beings in the world. Dear friend, as well as my splendid publisher. And so Betsy and some of the others were kind of like, and I'm like, what's wrong? I mean, you know, it's like, I wrote a cat book, what, you know, and they're like, oh, but, you know, we're really, the people are like really, you know, this is at the, like the larger company that overshadows DAW, the publishers. Hard to explain. Anyway, they're really focused on the Ostenard stuff, and they want to, you know, they love Splintered Sun, and they want to make it successful, and they, you know, they don't want you to like break up your momentum, and these are all perfectly good arguments when you're talking about professional publishing. You know, this is not, and it's something I've alluded to in other programs when I've been talking, or other readings when I've been talking to you guys, is that it's always a you know, a scale, you know, an uneven scale or an even scale, you know, as to what you do, what you write. Do you write just what you want? Do you try to follow your own market and keep giving people the same thing? Do you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So one of the reasons I wrote The Splintered Sun was because I still was full of Ostenard stuff after finishing that whole long Last King of Ostenard thing, you know, 4 long books and 2 short books that I'd been working on since 2014. And so I still had Ostenard in my blood and wanted to write this book, and wrote it. But because I didn't want it to be more of the same, it's, you know, set in a whole different era in Ostenard and a different part than what we're usually focused on, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I did not set out to write another series, and apparently that's now how it's going to be. So after this one, I'll probably have to write at least one more, and then who knows? Being me, I will probably discover, oh crap, I have to write a 4th volume for my trilogy. But we'll see when that happens. Anyway, so let me check in and see who has showed up and is saying hello. And Suzanne Owen is first off the line and saying from a slightly cooler Yorkshire. Oh, good. I'm so glad to hear that it's a little better after an intense heat wave. Yeah. Christy Sanders, hello, good to see you. Mark Craigbaum. Mark says, San Judas, which is, of course, from the Bobby Dollar books, may be an Otherland simulation on account of the magical feather from an angel that Paul Jonas, I will see myself out, says Mark. Actually, I was thinking about that the other day. I was thinking, is there like a way that I could make all of my books into some sort of Tad universe, a Tadiverse? And I haven't thought of it anymore since that. It was just kind of an idle amusing myself thought, because I grew up on comic books, where everything is, especially in, modern Marvel and DC comics, where, that they were all interconnected. It was one giant universe. And of course, I was a big fan of Michael Moorcock's long before I ever met him and got to know him and realized that he was also a really fine human being. But I was a big fan of his books and his whole Eternal Champion thing, which had these kind of semi-mirror images of his characters appearing in different worlds and different times and different things. And, who does that sound like? That sounds like me. Well, a lot of my inspiration, I think, came subconsciously from Michael. Anyway, so let's see who else we got here. So anyway, yes, it would be interesting to someday to figure out if it could all be connected together somehow. Anyway, so thank you for that thought, Mark. Wouter, hello. And Wouter, you've broken both your elbows? Oh my God. Oh God, get better soon. I am so hard to hear. I'm so sorry to hear that, and I hope to hear something about it. God, miserable. Iris also says hi. Hi, Iris. Good to see you. At least virtually in mention, if nothing else. And my God, Wouter, get well. That's miserable. Isaac Tim checking in from Stormless Valley. Tad camper. A tad camper? A tad camp. A tad camp would be a camp with a big emphasis on reading and treats. That's why I didn't join the Boy Scouts. I was a perfectly happy Cub Scout, and then I went to, after I'd gone through the whole Cub Scout thing and, all the badges and Weebelows and all that stuff. And when I was about 12 years old or so, I went to my first Boy Scout meeting thinking, oh, okay, now I'll go on to the local Boy Scout troop. And first of all, they had no snacks. No snacks. They had a meeting, but no snacks. And second of all, the night that I showed up, they were talking about a 50-mile hike. And I was like, 50-mile hike? No snacks, no treats, no drinks? I'm going to play Little League this year. I'm afraid that was the end for me in scouting. I probably would have been a better person if I had continued on, but there you go. Anyway, Chris Fab, hello. Christian, good to see you. Oh, it's very hot in northern Germany. Yeah, stay hydrated by all means. Nicole, same thing, says hi everyone from very hot Germany. Penny Davies, hello, good to see you. Justine, hello, good afternoon to you too. Where you are, I'm assuming, because it's not afternoon here, although you can't tell because my windows are behind the little desktop camera. Kristen Rule, hello, Kristen, good to see you. Oh dear, Chris Fab writes back. Justine pictures me as the Wizard of Oz. Well, interestingly enough, I wanted to be either the Wizard or the Cowardly Lion, but those had been pre-cast. So I wound up doing a doubled part, which was very common in old productions of things like The Wizard of Oz, where many characters would be one set of, obviously, because you see it in the movie, they would be one character in Kansas and another character in Oz. That's really obvious with the big characters like Scarecrow, etc. But I was both Uncle Henry and the guy who in the movies played by Frank Morgan, who does all of the main talking characters in the Emerald City. So he's the one who answers the gate, go away, River Wizard doesn't want to talk to you, or whatever, that guy. So I was him, and did the Oz song about that's how we pass the time away and stuff like that. But it was mainly fun because my kids were in it, and it was a local production with families and stuff like that. And it was just great fun. It was really lovely, and it's exactly what amateur theater should be. Way good. Whereas I did a lot of other kinds of theater, both amateur and semi-professional. And, sometimes people are just way too serious. Way too serious. But this was perfect. I loved it. In fact, when I get the new cat trees installed, and I'm going to give you guys a little tour of the office one of these days. when I figure out how to do that and do the cameraing and stuff like that, I will show you. I have a picture of me and the kids in our Wizard of Oz outfits. Devin was a munchkin, our daughter, and our son Connor was the chief flying monkey. Although when you see the picture of him, it looks like some weird racist thing. It's not. He's supposed to be a flying monkey. It's just that, it was kids doing the makeup. Anyway, Sandra says, just finished The Navigator's Children. It was brilliant. Thank you, Sandra. That is very kind. Alexandra Lirop says, hello. Nikki Chetwin says, good morning from a bright and hot, I'm assuming it says, but I lost it there. Already too hot, Leicestershire. Laura Carosi, hello. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Nice to have you. Dirk, hello. Up to 40 degrees Celsius today. Stay cool. Stay hydrated. Christy Sanders, Walter's Wild Ways. The name of the potential dog book, which I still want to write someday, is called The Story of Small. And I wrote up an outline for it and everything. And that the main character is a very small dog, and that's what he is named when he is first born. He is named Small, and that is his name throughout the whole thing, which is why it is The Story of Small. Let me see what else. Anybody here I haven't said hello to? Yes, now where everybody's talking about how hot it is in Germany, and you have my sympathies, all of you. I am sorry to hear of your suffering. I hate hot weather. I am not a hot weather guy. One of the things I really like about the part of Santa Cruz we live in is it is not hot. Anyway, but that is enough of that. And with the jibber jabbering, all jibber jabbered, now I can go on and start reading, which is what I'm going to do. So, thank you all for joining me. We are continuing with River of Blue Fire. And this is Chapter 6, Man from the Dead Lands. Netfeed, personals, I'm still waiting. Visual, picture of advertiser, MJ, female version. MJ, ooh, I'm getting very cross. I've been waiting, but some of you fellows that I thought were big men are acting like little boys. Why aren't you accessing my node? Are you afraid? Because if you are, you wouldn't have a good time anyway. I'm waiting for real men, and when I find them, I'm going to take their minds and bodies on a trip they'll never forget. The man named Birdcatcher had pressed his stone spear so tight against Paul Jonas's guts that the point had pierced the skin. Paul took a shallow breath and felt the pain expand like a tiny star as his stomach pressed against the spearhead. He was trapped, pinned on his back with the other man standing over him. "What do you want?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice quiet and calm. Birdcatcher had the wild look of a first-time bank robber. "If I kill you, you will go back to the land of the dead and leave us alone." "I'm not from the land of the dead." Birdcatcher's brow jerked in confusion. "You said that you were." "No, I didn't. You said that when you pulled me out of the river. I just didn't argue with you." Birdcatcher squinted fiercely, but did nothing, puzzling over Paul's words, but not discounting them completely. Deceit was apparently not common among the people, something that at another time Paul would have found fascinating. "No," Birdcatcher said at last, slow and deliberate as a judge delivering sentence. He appeared to have reached the limit of his reasoning ability and given up. "No, you are from the land of the dead. I will kill you and you will go back." Paul brought up his hands to clasp the barrel of Birdcatcher's spear and twisted it hard, but the Neanderthal held it braced between his chest and arm and would not let go. Paul hung on and pushed back with all his power as Birdcatcher leaned forward to dig it in deeper. Paul thought he could feel the tissues of his belly stretching before the stone point. His arms trembled with the strain of holding it away. "Stop!" Keeping his weight on the spear, Birdcatcher turned to look for the voice. Runsfar was walking quickly toward them, hands extended as though Birdcatcher's anger was a living thing that might suddenly attack. "Stop," he said again. "What are you doing?" "He has come from the land of the dead," Birdcatcher declared. "He has come for my boy-child." "Boy-child?" Paul shook his head. "I don't know anything about any child." Others of the people had begun to wake and move toward them, a tatty horde of shadows that appeared barely human. That appeared barely human. Oh, come on. Sorry, guys. There it is. Others of the people had begun to wake and move toward them, a tatty horde of shadows that appeared barely human in the weak light from the coals. "He is a ghost," Birdcatcher said stubbornly. "He came from the river to take my boy-child." Paul felt sure Runsfar would now say something wise and chief-like, but instead the other man only grunted and stepped back into the dark. "This isn't how it's supposed to be," Paul thought desperately. "If this were a story, I would have saved his life or something, and he'd have to help me." He pushed on the spear again, but he had no leverage. For long moments he and Birdcatcher remained locked in silent tension, but Paul knew he could not hold the sharp point away much longer. "Let me see the child," he pleaded, his voice thin because he could not take a deep breath. "Let me help him if I can." "No!" Fear streaked the rage in his voice, but there was not an ounce of give. "Why is Birdcatcher trying to spill blood in our home?" Dark Moon's quavering voice hit them like a splash of cold water. Birdcatcher had not flinched at Runsfar's appearance, but now he pulled the spear point from Paul's belly and took a step back. The ancient woman shuffled toward them, leaning on Runsfar's arm. She had evidently just awakened. Her wispy hair stood up in tangles like smoke. "Please," Paul said to her, "I am not a ghost. I do not mean the people any harm. If you want me to go away, I will go away." But even as he said it, he thought of the freezing darkness outside, peopled with monsters he could only dimly picture from half-forgotten books. Saber-toothed tigers? Didn't horrors like that live side by side with the cave dwellers? But what was the alternative? A fight to the death against a Stone Age savage? "I'm not Tarzan!" Helpless fury filled him. "What is the point of all this? I work in a bloody museum, for Christ's sake." "You say you will help the child." Dark Moon bent over him, her eyes wide, her face mostly in shadow. "No," Paul fought despair and frustration. "No, I said I will help him if I can." He paused, still short of breath. Trying to communicate with these people was maddening, despite the common language. Dark Moon reached out her hand to Birdcatcher, who shied away as though he feared being burned. She shuffled a few steps closer and reached out once more. This time he permitted her to touch his arm, which she encircled with her bird-like claws. "He will go to the child," she said. "No," Birdcatcher almost whispered, as though he spoke through great pain. "He will take my boy-child away." "If the dead call to your child, they call," said Dark Moon. "If they do not, they do not. You cannot keep away death with a spear. Not this kind of death." Birdcatcher darted a glance at Paul, as if to remind her that he had been doing just that, but her hand tightened on his arm, and he dropped his head like a sullen adolescent. Dark Moon turned to Paul. "Come to the child, River Ghost." No one in the tribe offered to help him up, so Paul struggled to his feet alone. The place where Birdcatcher had jabbed him throbbed painfully, and when he put his hand to the spot, he felt wetness on his fingers. The old woman, and runs far, turned and began a slow progress across the cave. Paul stepped in behind them. His reluctance increased when Birdcatcher followed him and rested the spear point lightly but eloquently against his back. I have to get out of here, he thought. These are not my people, and whatever this place is, it's not my place. I don't understand the rules. They led him toward a tent, one of the last in the line, so far from the fire that it had a small blaze of its own burning in a stone circle before it. Paul could imagine Birdcatcher sitting before the flames, brooding, working up his courage. If his grudge was over a sick child, it was hard to hate the man. A swift, shallow jab at his back when he hesitated at the camp's edge restored a little of his earlier dislike. Birdcatcher's tent was smaller than some of the others. Paul had to stoop to make his way through the door flap. 3 children waited in the tent, but only 2 looked up at his entrance, a goggle-eyed infant wrapped in furs, and the little girl he had seen earlier. Mouths open, both had gone completely still, like startled squirrels. Between them lay a small boy, apparently being tended by the older girl, wrapped in hides so that only his head was exposed. His dark hair was matted on his forehead, and his eyes had rolled back beneath the trembling lids, so that the firelight spilling through the tent flap exposed 2 slightly pulsing slivers of white. Paul knelt and gently touched his hand to the boy's forehead. He ignored Birdcatcher's angry murmur and kept his hand in place as the child weakly tried to turn his head away. The flesh seemed as hot as one of the stones on which the people cooked their food. When the boy, who looked to be 9 or 10 years old, brought up a feeble hand to push at Paul's wrist, he let go and sat up. He stared at the small, pale face. This was another way in which this entire mad dream was disastrously unlike a good old-fashioned story. In flicks, in science fiction tales, one of the visitors from the future always knew modern medicine and could make a jury-rigged defibrillator out of palm fronds or whip up a quick dose of penicillin to save the ailing chief. Paul knew less about doctoring a child than had his own mother and grandmother, who had at least been raised in the fading tradition of women's special wisdom. Penicillin? Didn't it grow on moldy bread somehow? And who was to say the child had an infection anyway, and not something far more difficult to cure, like a heart murmur or kidney failure? Paul shook his head in frustration. He had been a fool even to offer to see the child, although he doubted that he had given the boy's father any false hope. He could feel Birdcatcher breathing on the back of his neck, could sense the man's tension as though the air in the immediate vicinity threatened a sudden storm. I don't think, Paul began, and then the ill child began to speak. It was little more than a whisper at first, the barest scratchings of breath across dry lips. Paul leaned toward him. The boy twitched and threw back his head as though fighting to shake loose some invisible thing that clung to his neck, and his rasping voice grew louder. So dark, so cold, and all gone, all gathered, gone through the windows and doors and across the black ocean. Some of the people gasped and whispered. Paul felt a shudder run up his spine that had nothing to do with the spear pressed against his back. The black ocean? He had heard that phrase before. Where are they? The boy's grimy fingers scraped at the tent floor, snatching at nothing. All I have is the dark. The voice, the one, took them all away through the windows. His voice dropped back to a whisper. Paul leaned closer but could make out nothing more in the fading, rustling speech, which eventually became too quiet to hear. The fretful moment subsided. He stared down at the boy's pale features. The sagging mouth again seemed nothing but a conduit for wheezing breath. Paul had just lifted his hand to touch the child's forehead again when the boy suddenly opened his eyes. Black. Black like holes. Black like space. Black like the inside of a closet door after it swings shut. The gaze roved for a moment, unfocused, and someone behind him cried out in fear. Then the two pupils fixed on him and held him. "Paul? Where are you?" It was her voice, the painful music of so many dreams. Hearing it here in this shadowed place, he thought his heart would stop from the shock. For a long moment he could not breathe. "You said you would come to me. You promised." Trembling, the boy reached up and caught at his hand with a grasp stronger than he ever could have imagined from such small fingers. Before you can find the mountain, you must find the wanderer's house. You must come to the wanderer's house and release the weaver." Catching his breath at last, gasping it in like a man surfacing from ocean depths, he pulled away, struggling to fight free of the child's grip. For a moment the boy half rose from the bed, hanging on to Paul like a fish on a line. But then his hold slipped and he fell back, silent and limp, his eyes shuttered once more. He had left something in Paul's hand. After he uncurled his fingers, Paul had only a shivering moment to stare at the feather lying on his palm before something struck him explosively on the side of his head, tumbling him to his knees. There was a noise and stir at his back that seemed as distant as an old rumor. Then something heavy collapsed onto him and fingers curled around his throat. He could not see who he was fighting, and didn't care. He thrashed, trying to shake free of the vicious, unfair weight on top of him. Everything was stripes of light and dark and a wash of incomprehensible noise, but the roaring blackness in his head was fast blotting out all of it. He struggled with a force he did not know he had, and one of the strangling hands slipped from his neck. When it could not find its hold again, it gripped and gouged at his face instead. He tried to claw it away, then threw himself forward, struggling toward air as though he were in deep water, but his breathlessness went with him and could not be shaken loose. Something sharp scraped along his side, leaving a cold trail, and a little of his madness went away at the painful touch. He rolled until he felt something stop him, then tried to get to his feet. The thing that clutched his face lifted away again, and once more something cold and sharp jabbed at his side. Paul threw himself forward, and the thing restraining him gave way. The light changed as he fell, and the noises around him now came with echoes. Something bright was right beside his head. He was filled with a fury, a frustrated rage that he somehow knew had long been trapped inside him, and had only now escaped. When he understood that the bright something was the blaze of the small campfire, that he had smashed his way out of the tent, he rolled toward it and tipped the murderous shape clinging to his back into the stone ring. Screaming, as the elk in the hunter's pit had screamed, it let go of him and scrambled up and away, beating at the places where the fire had caught. But Paul was no longer interested in mere survival. He leaped across the campfire and pulled his enemy down, caring nothing for the flames that scorched his own skin. For a brief moment he saw a birdcatcher's terrified face beneath him. Something round and heavy and hot was in his hand. A stone from the fire pit, a part of him realized, a cold, remorseless part. He raised it up so he could smash Birdcatcher and everything else back into darkness. But instead, he himself was struck a sudden and surprising blow to the back of his head that sent a jolt like an ungrounded electrical wire along his backbone and threw him down into nothing. The voices seemed to be arguing. They were small voices and far away, and they did not seem terribly important. Was it his mother and father? They didn't argue much. Usually the older Jonas treated Paul's mother with a deference bordering on contempt, as though she were a poorly made object that could not stand even ordinary handling. But every now and then his father's air of benign disinterest would vanish, usually when someone outside the house had rejected one of his ideas, and then there would be a brief flurry of shouting, followed by silences that lasted hours. Silences which had made the younger version of Paul feel that everyone in the house was listening for him to make a noise and thereby spoil something. On those very few occasions when his mother stood up for herself and argued back, still in her fumbling, apologetic way, the shouting would not last any longer, but the silences might stretch for a day or more. During those long, deadly days, Paul stayed in his room, unwilling even to go out into the silence, calling up maps of faraway places on his screen instead, making plans for escape. In the endless middle hours of a still afternoon, he sometimes imagined that the house was a toy snow globe, that outside his room the corridors were slowly filling with clouds of settling, silent white. The voices went on arguing, still distant, still unimportant, but he had noticed in an offhand way that they were both male. If one was his father, then perhaps the other was Uncle Lester, his mother's brother, a man who did something to help banks make contacts overseas. He and Paul's father disagreed famously about politics. Uncle Lester thought that anyone who voted Labor understood nothing about the way the world really worked, and sometimes would argue, semi-cordially, for hours, while Paul's mother nodded and occasionally smiled or made a face of mock disapproval, pretending to be interested in their extravagant assertions, and while Paul himself sat cross-legged on the floor, in the corner, looking at one of his mother's precious books of reproductions, old-fashioned books on paper that her own father had given to her. There was one in particular Paul had always liked, and listening now to his father and Uncle Lester argue, he saw it again. It was by Bruegel, the elder, or at least he thought it was. For some reason he was having trouble summoning names just now, and showed a group of hunters marching down a snowy hillside, returning to a feast in the town below. The painting had moved him in ways he could not quite describe, and when he had gone to university he had used it as the default on his wall screen. On nights when his roommate had gone home to his family, Paul would leave it on all night, so that the white snow and the colorful scarves had been the last thing he saw before falling asleep. He did not know why it had become such a favorite, just that something about it, the shared life of the villagers in the picture, had moved him. An only child thing, he had always supposed. Thinking of that picture now, as the argument grew louder and then softer in slow waves, he could almost feel the sharp cold of Bruegel's snow. White, all white, sifting and settling, turning all the world uniform, covering up all that would otherwise cause pain or shame. Paul's head hurt. Was it thinking about the cold that had done it, or the continuing prattle of those people arguing? In fact, who were those people? He had thought one of them might be his father, but the other certainly could not be Uncle Lester, who had died of a heart attack while on vacation in Java almost 10 years back. In fact, Paul realized, more than his head hurt. His entire body was being bounced, and every bump was painful. And the pain itself was touched with frost. Even as he thought this, he dropped for half an instant straight down and thumped onto something uncomfortably solid. Solid and cold. Even through the dizziness, the heavy-headedness, he was sure of that. The ground was very, very cold. "With his blood," one of the voices was saying. "That brings a curse. Do you want the curse of a man from the dead lands?" "But that is Birdcatcher's spear," another said. "Why do we give it to this one?" "Not give, leave, because River Ghost's blood is upon it, and we do not want him drawn back to our place by his blood. Mother Dark Moon said so. You heard her speak." The cold was growing worse. Paul began to shiver, but the motion made his bones feel as though they were grinding together on their raw ends, and he let out a whimper of discomfort. "He wakes. Now we go back." "Runs far. We leave him too close to our place," the second voice said. "It would be better to kill him." "No. Mother Dark Moon said his blood would curse us. Did you not see how just a little of it made Birdcatcher ill? How it called out to the bad thing in Birdcatcher's child? He will not come back." Paul, his head pulsing, aching like one great bruise, still could not decide how exactly he should go about opening his eyes, so he felt rather than saw someone bending down and bringing a face close to his. "He will not come back," Runsfar said next to his ear, speaking almost as though for Paul's benefit, "because Mother Dark Moon has said that if he comes back, then it is he who will be cursed, not us, that the people will kill him then without fear of his blood." The nearness of the man grew less. Then something thumped down beside Paul. He heard a rhythmic noise after that. After a few moments he realized was the people's footsteps crunching away. Some idea of what had happened was beginning to come back, but what was coming even more swiftly was the freezing cold. A vibrato of shivers ran through him, and he doubled up like a blind worm, huddling into his own body for warmth. It did no good. The cold was still touching him all the way down one side, sucking the life out of him. He rolled over so that he was face down, then struggled until his knees were under his belly. He set his hands flat and tried to lift himself up. A wave of nausea and dizziness ran through him, and for an instant blackness came and drove even the cold away, but only for an instant. As the inner darkness receded, Paul opened his eyes. At first nothing changed. The night sky stretched above him, an unimaginable velvet black, but as his vision returned, he saw that this black was pierced with merciless, glittering stars. The uppermost edge of a wide yellow moon peered from behind the trees on one side of the hilltop. Beneath the sky lay a hillside, all whiteness, so that the world seemed to have been reduced to the simplest of dichotomies, and Paul himself was the only other thing in the world, trapped between black and white. "Why me?" he wondered sorrowfully. "What did I do, God?" A wind came down on him. It only lasted a moment, but that moment was like knives. Paul shuddered violently and dragged himself to his feet. He swayed, but managed at last to find balance. His head was throbbing, his bones felt broken. He tasted metal and spat out a dark glob of blood that made a tiny hole in the white hillside. A sob hitched his breathing. A distant howl, like a wolf's but much deeper, rose and fell, echoing across the white moonscape, a terrifying, primordial sound that seemed to mark out his hopeless loneliness. "They've left me to die." He sobbed again, furious and helpless, but swallowed it down. He was afraid to cry in case it might knock him to his knees. He didn't know whether he'd be able to get up a second time. Something long and dark lay in the snow by his feet, bringing back Runsfar's words. Birdcatcher's spear. He stared, but could only make sense of it at that moment as something to lean on. He wrapped the fur cloak more tightly. What kind of death sentence had they passed that he had been left his clothing? Then bent carefully. He almost overbalanced, but steadied and began the intricate process of picking up the spear while his legs threatened to buckle and his head suggested that it might explode. At last he wrapped his hand around it, then used it to push himself back upright. The wind freshened. It stabbed and scraped. Where do I go? For a moment he considered following the footsteps back to the cave. If he could not persuade them to let him back in, perhaps he at least could steal their fire, like the story Dark Moon had told. But even with his head full of blood and broken crockery, he knew that was foolishness. Where should he go? Shelter was the answer. He must find some place where the wind could not reach him. Then he would wait until it got warmer again. Until it gets warmer. It struck him as so blackly funny that he tried to laugh, but could only summon a wheezing cough. And how long will that be? How long is an ice age, anyway? He began to trudge down the hillside. Each step through the deep snow, a small, exhausting battle in a war he had no real hope of winning. The moon had climbed above the tree line, and now it hung full and fat before him, dominating the sky. He could not think of what he would have done had the night been moonless. As it was, he still failed to recognize many of the treacherous deep spots in the silvery snow in time to avoid them, and each time he fell into a hole, it took longer to extricate himself. He was shod in some kind of thick hide turned fur side in, but his feet were so cold anyway that he had begun to lose track of them some time ago. Now, it seemed, his legs ended several inches above his ankles. It didn't take a university education to tell him that was a bad sign. Snow, he thought, stumbling hip deep in the stuff. Too much snow. This and other maddeningly obvious thoughts had been his companions for the last hour. It took strength to chase them away, to stay focused, and he did not have enough strength left to spare. Snow, snow white, snow drop, snow drift. He picked up a foot. He wasn't quite sure which one, and put it down again, sinking through the crust. The wind bit at his face where the cloak sagged away from his cheeks. Snow drift. Drift was the world, all right. Drift was the word, all right. That was all he'd ever done. Drifted through life, drifted through school, drifted through his job at the Tate Gallery, making the same tired jokes over and over for ladies' luncheon parties. He had thought once that he would become something, be a person who made a difference. As a child, he had wrestled with the idea without even realizing it, unable to envision what that someday person would do, who that person would actually be. Now, as if some god of underachievers had noticed his directionlessness and mandated a punishment to fit his crime, he had apparently been condemned to drift through time and space as well, like a man lost after closing time in an endless museum. Yes, that was exactly what he had done. Drifted. Even here in this cold, primitive place with his memory returned, or most of it, he had allowed others to choose his directions. The people had dragged him from the river when he could not free himself, and had decided that he was, what had Brunsfar said, a man from the dead lands. And he had exceeded, just as ineffectually full of self-pity as if someone had set down a briefcase on the last empty seat in the underground, forcing him to stand. River Ghost, they called him. They were more right than they knew. Certainly everywhere he had been since this mad ride began, he had floated like a homeless spirit. And everywhere he had been, he had found himself at one point or another adrift in a river, as if it were all the same river, a perfect metaphor for his unguided life. The same river over and over. A sudden memory cut through Paul's wandering thoughts. They will look for you on the river. Someone had said that to him. Had it been a dream, one of his strange dreams? No, it had been the voice from the golden crystal. In his dream it had been a singing harp, but the crystal had spoken to him here in the Ice Age. They will look for you on the river, the crystal had told him. So it was true. The river did mean something. Perhaps that was why he could not escape it. Paul paused. Through the pain and confusion, something else struck him, not a memory, but an idea. It filled him with a painful clarity that, for that instant, pushed everything else away. He had drifted and drifted, but no longer. If he were not to float and tumble forever like a leaf in the wind, he must take some control. The river is where I pass from place to place. He knew it with certainty, though the thought had not come to him until just this second. The Looking-Glass Land, Mars. Here, I came in from the river each time. So if I look for it... If he looked for it, he had a direction. If he found it, things would change, and he would come closer to some sort of understanding. He struggled to remember how the people's hunting party had traveled, tried to make sense of the moon's position, but he had never learned to do such things in his other life, and felt a fraud even trying here. But he did know that water found the lowest places. He would continue downhill. He would go down. And he would get out. He would not drift. He would not drift anymore. The moon had passed most of the way across the black reaches above him, but still not far enough to suggest that dawn would be coming soon. Every step was an agony now, each surge forward coming only after he made promises to his body he doubted he could ever keep. The only solace was that he had traversed the steepest part of the hillside. As he tottered through the shrubby, snow-covered trees, the ground before him was almost level. But even such a small slope was difficult in these conditions. Paul stopped, leaning on the spear, and thanked Birdcatcher for having stuck him with it, thereby rendering it taboo with Paul's own blood. Then he wondered if that were really so. Run's far and Dark Moon's interpretation of what might be dangerous had resulted in Paul not being killed in the first place, and then being dumped with warm clothes and a spear. Perhaps in their own way, the two of them had been trying to give him a chance. No sense in wasting it. He took a deep breath and limped forward. Strange to think that he might well owe his life to a pair of Neanderthals, contemporaries of his own incredibly distant ancestors. Stranger still to think of these people, living their lives in something like normality until he had stumbled onto them. Who were they, really? Where was he? Paul Jonas was still considering this when the wind shifted and the smell of death washed down the hillside onto him. His skin tightened with the sudden thrill of fear, and every hair on his head stood on end. The stink was more than rotting flesh. It was laced with animal musk and urine and dirt and blood, too. It was despair. It was the end of the road. He twisted to look behind him, and a dark shape on the hillside behind him abruptly froze, so that for half an instant he thought his own dark-hindered eyes had fooled him, that the shape was only a rock. But then another shadow moved farther up on the slope. As it turned its head, muzzle sniffing at the shifted wind and the new smells it brought, Paul saw eyes glint yellow-green with reflected moonlight. The wind became brisker, blowing the horrid tang past him again, and all his muscles tensed as his hindbrain set out the most primitive of alarms. Even in the grip of mounting panic, he knew that it would do no good to run. Another heavy four-legged shape was coming slantways across the hillside. If they had not attacked him yet, these nameless beasts, it was because they weren't sure what kind of thing he was either, how dangerous he might be. But if he fled, even Paul, who had seen far fewer wild animals growing up than most suburban children, felt certain that would be the universal signal for dinner is served. And that's where we're going to stop, because as often happens, I had no idea where. I thought I would at least get through this chapter, but we still got another couple of pages or so to get through this chapter, I believe. Yeah, a little bit left. So we'll save that for later today. And that is the name of that tune. So, anyway, thank you for hanging out with me. As always, it is much appreciated because, as I often point out, if not, I'd just be sitting here talking to myself in the middle of the night, and I already do enough of that, mostly to dogs and cats. But, yeah, so that's basically it. So I'm very grateful to have people show up and want to hang out. And it's also kind of charmingly weird in a way to be reading my own books, some of which I have never read since they were published. So that's all strange and interesting too. But anyway, we are now past the witching hour, so I am going to trot off. So come back if you can at 7 p.m. my time. However many hours from now that is, 10, 17 hours, I don't know. If not, I will see you the next time that I see you, whether that be next week or you will see the next broadcast or the next reading on YouTube, where they are curated by the splendid Christian Fabricius. Until that point, take good care of yourselves, take good care of friends, loved ones, people around you who you love and care about, but also keep an eye out for others you might not know so well that might just need a kind word, a couple of bucks, a listening ear, just a smile, you know. It never hurts. Well, I mean, I suppose it does if you like smile at somebody who turns out to be a psychotic, but that doesn't happen very often, frankly. And besides, you've already spent a lot of time with me, so you are well conditioned to deal with crazy people. Anyway, with that all said, take good care. Be good. Be well. I will see you soon. Peace. And arrivederci bambini. Ciao.